Hi everyone, and happy Halloween! This is Kayla with bad sound quality because I am currently editing this episode. I just wanted to provide a content warning. We do discuss suicide and implied incest, so if any of this makes you feel uncomfortable, please feel free to skip this episode. Well, have a wonderful spooky season, and if you want to continue listening to the episode, we hope you enjoy it. It's a weird one. Welcome to Darkly Lit, where we take a drive on a cold Halloween night to figure out what the fuck it is we just read. I'm your host, Kayla King. I'm joined by my good friend, Sade.
Hello, I'm Sade. I didn't finish reading.
And my husband, David.
Corn.
So this Darkly Lit is going to be a bit different.
It's going to be a first for us
it's
in different ways.
Okay. Well, it's Halloween. So if there's
it's
any...
our Halloween episode, except it might not. It's releasing on the 13th, so.
But it's October 13th.
Is it the trick? Is it a treat? We don't know, but let's find out
at the same time.
So we just some of us. Our book that we are discussing is Demon Theory by Stephen Graham Jones. And off the bat, we should first say there are no questions for this. We didn't receive any, and there's a good reason why. We came to discover that you cannot purchase a physical copy of this book anywhere. You can only get the ebook or an audiobook. They were fairly cheap. From what I saw, it was only $5, but I know a lot of people are much more comfortable with a physical copy. And another tricky thing about this book too is it's less of a book and more of a literary treatment. Actually, David, you want to give the summary?
I'll do the best I can. So what this is a trilogy, a hypothetical trilogy of horror movies. With the first one being set on Halloween night at the house of a med student named Hale, or his mother's house. He and a bunch of his med student friends go out to this house when on what seems like a pretty simple kind of late night call, but find that weird stuff starts happening once they get there, specifically involving Hale's past, which includes an accident that rendered his sister comatose, a very murderous dad in a gargoyle costume or a gargoyle mask that was taken from one of the other people, and demons, literal fucking demons that come in out of nowhere. The first one has, we're going to go full spoilers here, right?
Yeah, full spoilers.
Okay, yeah, I'll just say the first one ends with an Owl Creek Bridge kind of scenario where you wonder if the whole thing was all just the dying delusions of a kid who's hanging himself, committing suicide. The second one is set in a hospital, the follow-up, and has a lot of the same characters who, as the story progresses, slowly remember the events of the first movie, even though they're all alive. Many of them died in that movie. And then the hospital gets overrun by a bunch of coma patients who are slowly turning into demons. It's the reason I'm having such a hard time summarizing this is I still don't really know what the hell happened in a lot of cases. And there's some more reveals that happen there. It feels like a horror sequel in that the first one, strange as it would be, didn't seem like it left a lot of room for a sequel, but a sequel was made anyway. Which,
that happens.
Credit where credit's due, in that essence. And then the third movie is back to the cabin again, now 3 years after the events of the second one. and we get even more reveals and a final conclusion about Hale's family, and maybe about the weirdness of this demon cycle they're all caught in.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this is gonna be a weird one to talk about.
Now, Sade, you chose to stop.
I did. I was somewhere in the middle of the second part. And I was listening to the audiobook because I do a lot of work with my hands, and so audiobooks have just been the easiest way for me to read our selected books this year and also complete other things that I work on. And I don't know like what it was exactly that made me really want to stop. Okay, well, I have a good idea. But there are like different factors, and one I think definitely was the format that the story is presented in. Like everything is much more described in like, and then we pan this, and it's kind of like this scene from that. And that didn't so much bother me because I have a very visual way of thinking. I have overactive imagination. So like picturing the book, I could follow it that way, but in the way that the characters I think were described, I couldn't form any attachment to any of the characters. And if I can't latch onto at least a single character, then I have little to no interest in the narrative plot usually. So I would get to points where the audio was going and I was working on something, and normally I'm very good at like listening and paying attention while I work, but I would just like realize, oh, I did not grasp what just happened and I don't care enough to want to go back. And so I was like, I'm not getting anything out of this. I'm going to stop and just be like, I stopped, and I'll talk about why, and maybe you guys can explain to me shit that I wasn't understanding or grasping or failing to grasp. So
Although I think this is kind of an important lesson, is that if you're reading a book and it's not working and you're not enjoying it, you're allowed to put it down. Like, you should not have to force yourself to get through a book
unless it's a homework assignment.
Well, even then, okay, yes.
I just think about all the stuff I had to read in college.
Yeah, but say it's not getting graded on this.
No.
This is a discussion.
No, I'm splitting hairs.
Was there a SparkNotes version I should have gone to finish?
There is.
I wish there was, because it would help me make sense of some of the things that I'm barely wrapping my head around.
We looked through reviews of this. We tried to look up what people have said. There is not much. It's just the same kind of thing. And the one consistent thing that I've read in reviews is it's always compared to House of Leaves because of how unusual the style is. And it's true. So it's written like a literary treatment, which is, like you said, that's not an abnormal thing. I've used to read scripts, I don't want to say for a living, but I did get paid to read scripts. And this sort of style came in quite a bit. But it's a weird mix between a literary treatment, which would go a lot more in detail. Like, scripts tend to go a lot more in detail and will tell you immediately what they mean. Whereas this is also a mix between a book, where the book wants to give you only enough details to keep you guessing. But that's tricky when your brain is trying to read it like a script / literary treatment. And they're like, but what's happening? Why are they saying this? Why is this?
Why aren't they? Or more specifically for me, it was, why aren't they saying these things?
Yeah.
Why aren't we getting more of an explanation? Why aren't we getting? And I was like, am I just missing something? Am I dense? But I'd go back and like, I'm not having a hard time visualizing things, but sometimes I am, because the language is so interesting. And like, while it does paint a really interesting visual picture and I can see it, there's other times I lose the thread. I lose what's going on, and I have to backtrack in order to do it. I think the reason I like the second one stuck out to me the most is because it has the most consistent sense of space.
Yeah.
And I'm not as confused about what's happening in the moment.
So another thing too is the way David and I read this, because I tried to read it on my own and it was tricky, and then David and I tried to listen to it by audiobook, and then that was hard too, because we're like, wait, stop, and we had to rewind, and it's like, why don't we just read it to each other? And that's how we got through it.
Huh.
We literally like would switch off reading it to each other, and then we would pause to be like, wait, what just happened?
And then I would scroll back and we would talk about it for a second, and then
basically try to compare, like, okay, do you understand what's going on? Do you get what this is?
Oftentimes it was like, no. Sometimes it was like, oh yeah, okay, there was a bit there, and then it would be like, but you really have to be paying attention. And then it's like, hopefully there's be some payoff to something we don't understand a little later. And oftentimes there was not. It would just be left vague and weird.
And another thing about this too is, I will give Stephen Graham Jones this. He is incredibly horror movie savvy. It's kind of insane. So there is a lot of pop culture references throughout this, which
I had mixed feelings about that, where it was like, if it was like used in the narrative to kind of describe the feel of a scene, I was like, okay, I appreciate that. Like, that makes me visualize this better. But when it was like the characters describing, like using that knowledge to kind of be like, well, this is what's probably going to happen next, or like, you know, that you're the final girl or something, then it got kind of like annoying.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I mean, when I was a teenager, I was like this, like, because I am a big pop culture nerd, and I would make references all the time because I was like that, and I realized that's a very annoying trait to do. So I try to limit myself on that, where the characters are very much like this. I feel like the dialogue in the first part, the first technical movie, is terrible. It is like, no, who talks like this? Like, they're way too witty, way too on the beat. Like, I don't believe these people.
It has that like movie speak quality to it, where you're just like, what? And then, you know, that's my reaction. It felt like it flowed better in the second one, though. And I probably, maybe because there's more characters, or maybe because they're actually stopping to try and figure out what's going on instead of talking in quippy, we're smart and genre savvy.
Well, there's another thing too. It's much more action packed, and that was the intention. So again, Stephen Graham Jones knows his horror, and usually with the sequels to a horror movie, they tend to be the more action packed. They tend to have a little more gore, more like
a bigger special effects budget.
Exactly. And the sequel feels like that. It actually feels like they just got a bigger budget, and they're like, let's add in the gore, let's add in more people, let's make this more exciting, let's make it aliens to alien.
Mm-hmm.
So I gotta give him props. He knew what he was doing with that.
Well, the other thing too is, what I appreciate is the first Demon Theory, because it's, you know, this 3-movie trilogy. First Demon Theory by itself could be a self-contained package. Does it leave some stuff hanging? Yeah, but it's a Jacob's Ladder scenario.
Yeah,
you're just, the way it's self-contained feels like it's a bizarre Jacob's Ladder thing, where you're not quite sure exactly what happened, but you can put a lot of it together. It's an Owl Creek Bridge scenario, and Owl Creek does get brought up a fair amount in here at times. But then, because the idea is that the sequel is building off the success of the original, but has to work with weird threads that the other one left off in order to force a story, you get a decent cohesive story with some weird beats, and it feels like someone was forced to write a sequel when there was meant to be a self-contained thing. And that's brilliant to me, because that was intentional. Like, you know, that, like, it feels like Stephen Graham Jones came here, is like, well, this is what would happen. Like, this is the Halloween 2. We didn't need a Halloween 2, but we got one. And then in order to make it still work, it has to add things that weren't important in the original, like, oh, Laurie Strode being Michael's sister, and that's the reason.
Yeah,
you didn't need that in the first one. You didn't need a sequel, but since you got a sequel, they're going to take little threads that were in the original and expand the plot. And that was interesting. Like, I actually really appreciated that between the first and the second ones. And I think it's another reason the second one appealed to me, as a sign of how the writer understands the genre he's writing in. So the third one is a cut and dried like third in a trilogy.
Yeah.
So it feels good. It's the Return of the Jedi. It goes back to the same location. It goes and tries to tie up some loose ends, but it doesn't really tie up some loose ends while still leaving things very weird and cryptic. So we'll talk about that.
You want to know what it is? You want to know what this whole bullshit thing is?
Yes, please. I was gonna say, what did I miss? I was gonna ask you guys, what did I miss in that third part? Like, should I have kept reading?
I think if you're not trying to rush it like we were, I think it is worth reading the whole trilogy but at the same time, because we were rushing it, I got frustrated because it was going on for so long.
Mm-hmm.
That said, on a reread, I might be able to put it together better, but the third part has the majority of the characters that survived the second one realizing that they need to go back to the house to put an end to the quote-unquote cycle, right?
Right, because they're having memories of both the first movie and the second movie, and they're like, why is this happening?
This never happened, but it also did. And meanwhile, like, Hale shouldn't exist where he exists, because it's like the second one sets up like, oh, okay, the reason in the first one all these characters showed up with these are the paramedics that are taking the dying Hale to the hospital.
Yes.
Or whatever.
In the first movie, Hale's in his early 20s, but then it gets revealed that he tried to kill himself at the age of 14. And then at the end, it's revealed this is all an Owl Creek Bridge situation, as we mentioned before, or Jacob's Ladder, where
Hale is dead.
Hale is dead or dying, and he's imagining all this as 14-year-old him is
being cut down from the noose.
Yes.
Or it's implied that he died and this is all his, like, purgatory. It's interesting.
And then the sequel is he's still alive but in a coma, and it's a couple years later, and so he's like 16 years old by that point, or 17, in a coma. And then no it's 16, that's right, 2 years pass. There's a whole time loop. And then in the third one we see Hale again, but as a 28-year-old, and it's like, what the heck? And they, at least the characters point this out, it's like, wait, last time we saw him, he was 16. He should only be...
And not to mention 16, but at the very end of the movie, literally carried off by one of the demons.
Yes.
He
should be dead.
he falls off the roof of the hospital and is dead, and one of the demons carries off his body.
Wait, so he, like, hits the ground and is dead and then is carried off by one of the demons?
Yeah, well, at least I think he is. Like, okay, so the other thing that happens in the second one is Jenny turns into a demon. She's incubating. It's a demon that is either taking on Jenny's form or was using the idea of Jenny as a vessel. And then in a weird shift, Jenny, as she's like feeding on people at the hospital, she is growing up. She goes from that to an adolescent to an adult. When she's an adult, she's TJ from the first movie.
Welcome to crazy hell.
Yeah. So TJ was apparently older Jenny the entire time, which is weird.
See, I'm like, okay, wait. Who the fuck was TJ in the first part?
TJ was the intern that we first see in the beginning of the movie, but then she ends up staying. She doesn't join them on the journey.
Okay, that's why I don't remember them.
Yeah, she's left behind at the hospital.
Okay. Jenny was Hale's younger sister who, in the first part, loses the ability to use her legs.
Yeah.
Right.
And Hale blames himself because they were riding on a three-wheeler that Hale was riding, and Jenny's foot gets caught, and that's how she loses her ability to walk. And then a couple of years later, dies.
Which is why Hale tried to kill himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we find out that Hale's dad apparently tried to bury Jenny in the basement for reasons we don't quite understand.
To spare his mom seeing her like that or something like that.
Well...
Or not.
Okay, well, that's where things get weird. So the third one, the second one definitely leaves questions for the third one. But basically, by the end of the thing, Jenny/TJ becomes a full-fledged demon.
Okay.
And on the roof, in a final showdown between her and Nona, who, is the custodian, is now sort of the ringleader of this whole I remember situation. Hale finally comes out of his coma, sees this whole situation, and then sort of in a bid to make it all end, throws himself off the roof. Jenny jumps off after him, and they both hit the ground together, and then a demon carries them off.
Both of them off. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Other significant things happen. Virginia dies again, and she's not back in the third one. Khan loses his hand, so he has a prosthetic in the third one.
Adding to that whole humor of the first movie where
he had the 2 prosthetics.
Yeah.
They even go to the same fucking convenience store from the first one, and the clerk even does the whole fucking Halloween line again.
The third movie is, by the way, set on Halloween night.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the third one, Nona's been in a mental institution for 3 years. She stages an escape and then kidnaps Sari, who was not in the second one at all, but he's like, we need to find her because we need to get everybody back to the house so we can end the cycle. And Nona just seems to be the ringleader in this whole situation. They pick up the bum who was near the phone and shave him, and it's Hale.
How? We have no idea.
Now, apparently they don't either. They're trapped in a cycle, and they're like, okay, there's some sort of gate, universal gate that's open, and the demons are using it. And then the third one continues to add nonsense, which is introducing a weird, like, supernatural pseudoscience plot with Sari's dad was like a physician who was experimenting with a serum that could like heal people, but also like prolong life. But it also exacerbated additional conditions. And then like Hale's dad was one of the people who survived the trial, which is why he can't die. Like that's a thing, that's a thread that gets introduced that we're not sure about. Turns out that Egan from the first movie was Sari's dad. Yeah, it goes off the goddamn rails. But the weirdest, okay, but here's the last kicker. By the end of it,
oh God.
By the end of it, almost everybody's been killed off once again, and Hale is trying to get Nona out of there on the 3-wheeler. And you find out the reason Stan has been killing people is he's trying to end this cycle, and he wants the demons to take him. He wants to die because he can't die. But every time he says, take me, and tries to get the demons to take him, they either throw him off or fly away from him.
And then for listeners, Stan is Hale's father.
Yes, yeah. Stan is Hale's father.
Who can't die because of the weird treatment. Yeah, okay.
He's a zombie.
I feel like any listener listening to this is like, what the fuck is this?
Your reaction is just like ours. So,
oh my God.
Do you want to talk about what the final twist is?
Oh, motherfucker. This is so...
Please. I
will say one of the weird things is that Egan takes a syringe and injects Nona with corn fluid from those corn cans, and it's like implied that it's actually the fluid that was keeping Stan alive.
Doesn't matter.
But it doesn't matter because the twist renders it all moot, in my opinion.
We discover... Yeah, it does. The whole thing is all moot because of this. So we discover... First off, that the person who killed Jenny is actually Hale's mother. Hale's mother choked Jenny to death because she couldn't take the pain of her daughter
being crippled.
Yeah. But then it turns out this whole scenario, everything that's happened is all in Hale's mother's head because Hale's mother is actually Nona.
The fuck?
Yes.
I'm so angry.
I know, right? So, yeah, apparently this whole thing is Nona explaining all this in the mental hospital to this doctor.
She is telling her delusions, this whole trilogy, which is just all this woman's delusions.
After she killed her family.
Yes.
She stabbed Stan to death with a crucifix. She throttled Jenny to death. And you know this because eventually you see that there was... You know how she was washing the dishes in those flashbacks when Stan finds Jenny dead? There's like dish soap on Jenny's collar. And she looks like she's been like choked to death. And then Nona, reenacting a bunch of this, goes down, finds that Hale, maybe even adult Hale, but you don't see his face, has repeated the thing and tried to hang himself. But instead of lifting him up this time, she pulls him down so that it kills him, finishes him off. And then the camera pans around and you realize Nona is Hale's mother. You see the whole family dead, and then it cuts to the actress who played Hale's older mother now in this hospital explaining all these delusions to the doctor. And the last freaking line of the movie is a smash cut back to the house from the first movie with all of them sitting in the living room and Hale making the quote, my dad has an extensive movie collection, which then explains all the movie quotes and genre savvy nonsense we've been dealing with this whole time.
By the way, let's not forget Nona in the first movie was sleeping with Hale. Like they were dating.
It was a first date in the first movie.
But it was implied that they had something of a building relationship prior to this first date.
Thinking about it as a disconnected trilogy where they had to fit pieces together in order to make it work, because that was the like idea. The people writing the first movie hypothetically would not know that there was going to be this twist at the end with Nona being Hale's mother the whole time. So
see, that's another brilliance behind it. You could tell that he's like, well, I'll write this first thing, and then how would someone be like, oh, this movie did well, how could I make a sequel to this? I'd make it about this. They'll probably want the actors back or these characters back, so let's bring the characters back, and then it'll be this whole convoluted plot. And that's why a lot of people compare it to House of Leaves, because I think eventually we'll get to House of Leaves, but that's going to be one of those, like, we will discuss that over the course of like a few months, because it's a very long book.
mm-hmm. In the end, I did enjoy the whole thing, but the ending was such a frustrating, and it was all a dream curveball, but was it really? Like, it does what the first one did, but even more convoluted. Like, just, I have to walk away.
I mean, if you're looking at it from the perspective that it was written to be the way a horror genre movie series would end up progressing, then it all works, because yeah, that shit would happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you think of it like that, I'm like, okay, that's kind of brilliant, but at the same time, what the fuck?
Sounds like a crazy journey to go on. And I'm a little sad that I jumped ship, but I'm also at peace with it. I do want to read something else by Jones that is more the more typical, like, written narrative, like a more novelized novel style narrative.
I'm with you too. There's some novels he's actually written that are general novels that sound very interesting. Like he has one about Final Girls and another about
I think another one that came out this year that I want to read was the only Good Indians.
Yeah, that sounded very interesting as well. I think the reason I thought, oh, let's do Demon Theory,
was because it took place on Halloween.
It took place on Halloween, and I'm like, oh, it's a literary treatment too. And usually literary treatments tend to be much more simpler than this. They tend to be much more quicker. And I'm thinking, well, if it's based off a movie, like if this is probably would be 2 hours. I did not realize going into it would be a trilogy. That's not described in any description I found. And I didn't want to read reviews because I don't want to be spoiled by anything. But the only way you could figure this out is if you read the reviews. Like, oh yeah, it's a trilogy of stories. I'm like, what? Ugh.
See, the audiobook tells you that at the beginning, but it calls it Demon Theory 16. So I was just like really confused.
It's like I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the experience. I kind of had to let go that maybe it didn't end in a way that I was necessarily satisfied with. But then again, I didn't necessarily expect it to either. Like, it's fine. It's interesting. I enjoyed the experience, but man, was it a tough read.
Yeah.
It's a really tough read. And yeah, the characters, I understand where you're coming from, Sade, about the characters, because they're all pretty two-dimensional. Well,
Khan gets more likable. Khan gets more likable as you continue on.
Yeah.
And becomes like the funniest character. I actually also really like the character of Rush as well in the sequel, who is the cancer patient, who is like, he knows he's dying, so he's like, no, what do I care making it silly, but also dealing with the fact that he has a younger brother that he communicates with and is lying to him because he's like, I don't want to tell him and break his heart. And
yeah, that was Rush was great.
Mm-hmm. Like, that's actually very interesting. That's a very likable character. I hated Siri. Siri was so bland of a character.
She didn't have much going for her.
She didn't. I'm trying to go through it. Virginia, again, not much of a character either. Hale's whatever. Hale is basically a protagonist. Mm-hmm. That's really what he is. Nona's character is interesting. She's a protagonist, but she's a active protagonist for the most part, so I give her props for that. Like, I'm going through like the characters in my head, because you're right, the first movie doesn't really paint them in a good picture.
It was really hard to like differentiate the characters to like I don't know. When we got to the second part and they're introducing new characters as well, and I'm just like, wait, are we talking about this character, this character? Like, who was this character? Like, I could not grasp onto anyone.
It's hard.
No, because they're all witty. They all talk in film references, and they're all kind of snarky as well. So it's kind of hard to, first of all, split them apart, but at the same time, it's hard. It's tricky. In one sense, it makes sense for the horror genre because a lot of horror films are like this. Usually, for the most part, the characters are kind of bland because they're like, well, they're gonna die anyway. So, can you remember a single character from like Jason, or not Jason? I'm sorry, that it's Friday the 13th, or Sleepaway Camp, or
Sleepaway Camp I can, but not. But that's because they.
Okay, besides the main character.
Oh, there was Ricky.
Okay,
but that's because he got to yell some very creative swears at people who threatened Angela.
But like the people who died too, just like I'm trying to think.
I don't remember their names. I just remember. Oh, there was the pervert cook. There was the. There was some other douchey kids.
What about Halloween? Other than Laurie, do you remember any of the characters' names from Halloween?
No.
Yeah, for the most part, because it's like they're typical horror movie characters. They are snarky. They're kind of horny. They're usually teenagers, so it's kind of interesting that they decided for the first one to cast him as college students. But
close,
it works. I mean, college students are still like drinking and all that. Well, but
the movie tries hard in a weird way to make them kind of a breakfast club of horror.
Yeah,
and then like only a couple of the characters really stand out. I don't know if there's much more to be said, honestly. The interesting stuff with the demons was like there's a lot of mythology and psychology thrown in.
What do you think of the demon designs? Because they describe them like gargoyles for the most part.
I mean, I kind of liked that aspect of like a gargoyle looking like demon, because normally, like compared to like other demons that we usually see in like other, I can't really think of any other like gargoyle looking like demons in a horror series.
Yeah, neither can I. Oh man. Well, a lot of the books we're reading right now tend to be modern because as sad as this is, authors of color started getting more recognition within the past like 20 years.
Yeah.
Or at least particularly in the horror genre, I guess.
In terms of horror genre, yes. Because it usually, the most famous horror authors tend to be basically white guys, like Stephen King, Clive Barker, H.P. Lovecraft, like Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah.
I mean,
Bram Stoker. Yeah. Well, I mean, we can say that about a whole lot of things. That it was mostly dominated by old white guys. But, I mean, okay, even though I didn't finish reading, I don't regret the experience. And from what you guys have shared, I am like fascinated by some of like the narrative choices, and like just it sounds like a crazy experience, and I wish I had the time to like kind of really dive into it, because I think I would have appreciated more if it wasn't like, oh, we're reading this on that deadline and there's like 100 other things that our minds are on too, because it does have some of those elements that are kind of interesting, like the gargoyle demons that we were mentioning. I think that's a cool visual in my head. The like cream corn is the only thing in the house was kind of funny, and then how they, I guess, brought that back later, and like that's how Stan was staying alive somehow. I don't know. Like it's crazy, but I kind of love that.
The whole thing is a trip.
I think it's meant to be a trip.
So I've read somewhere like some books are meant to be basically devoured, and then some are meant to be chewed slowly
And dissected and maybe thought over. This
is definitely one of those books that needs to be read slowly. You gotta take your time with it. You gotta like pause and think about it. And honestly, it's the same with House of Leaves. You really do have to stop and be like, okay, what the fuck is going on here? Because it is it is trippy. It is trying to be genre savvy. And another thing too, and this can be either really annoying or really helpful. Every pop culture reference has a footnote that tells you where that pop cultural reference comes from, which occasionally can be helpful because there were times I'm like, wait, what is this a reference to? And I look and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. But there are so many. Like I think by the time we were getting near the end, there's like 400 footnotes, and that's insane.
Damn. Would you guys recommend this to anybody?
Yes and no. I think there's a few people I could think that might get some enjoyment out of this. I think the people that would enjoy it the most are genre savvy individuals, like horror genre savvy individuals, and hardcore readers. It's very niche, I must say.
Yeah, I would say that too. What exactly that niche is, I don't know. It's very far from, I think, where I normally like to dive. But
honestly, I think if you enjoyed House of Leaves, I think you might enjoy this. Again,
know what you're getting into first.
We definitely went into this one a little bit blind, and that just happens sometimes.
And well, here's the difficult part. Like I was trying to read other summaries to see like, oh, what is this? And they said it's a literary treatment. And I'm like, oh, okay. And they gave the same summary everywhere they went. Like, and everywhere it said it's like, this is definitely a horror book. And I'm like, great. It's Halloween night. They're going to a house. Weird stuff starts happening. I'm like, great. I know what to expect. I didn't, but nothing prepared me for this. The only way you could figure this out is if you read the reviews. And I don't know how do you tell people, hey, read the reviews before you do this? Go into this because it's a trip.
I really don't have that much to add. I'm sitting here kind of just taking it all in. And I just honestly think that this might be as good a time as any to just say, hey, it is what you make it.
Some things, like some stories, some books, you just kind of take it for what it is. And there's no really like dissecting it or understanding it or like fully like explaining it. And maybe that's why the summaries for this book are all pretty just like, oh, it's a literary treatment, and I don't really know what else to say about it because it's kind of just is what it is. You'll either enjoy it and like enjoy trying to pick it apart, or you just again take it as it is and like, well, that was an experience. I'm gonna go eat some cream corn now.
Not too much. The Garmin Bozio will get you good.
Yeah. The only thing I wish there was physical books of this, because I think it would be better read as a physical book. In all honesty.
You know what else is? You know what else too? I actually do want to see this as a movie now.
Yeah, I feel like I would have really enjoyed this as a film. Versus, I think I chose the most difficult way to approach a story as an audio ebook. Audible. My brain just went. But yeah, I think this would have been a fun series visually.
Oh, I would watch this trilogy. This trilogy sounds fascinating to me, and I could see a lot of horror fans getting into this. Because that was one hell of a wild ride.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Our next
fucking Halloween.
Before I say what our next book is, does anybody want to do we have any final thoughts, or is this a good place?
I think this is a good spot to wrap it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So to make it simpler for everybody and more accessible, and because we need this, we've decided we're going to read a webcomic by a South Korean artist and writer. And this is actually kind of a famous webcomic, I've come to realize. It's called Bongcheong-dong Ghost, and by Horang. I've heard good things about this. I heard short, and honestly, that's enough for me.
It sounds good.
And it is a complete webcomic, and you can find it online. We will provide a link to the webcomic on in our show notes.
And we'll probably tweet it out at Darkly Lit Pod on Twitter.
Yes, we will absolutely do that. Other than this for the Halloween season, we've got a bunch of other stuff going on, like the Boo Olympics.
Woo! We're gonna take you down. So we have 2 contests right now to finish up the Boo Olympics. We have a creepy cooking staff writing contest that is open to listeners from all of creative horror, whether like UCA fans, Nightmare Air fans, Witching Hour fans, Darkly Lit fans. If you like writing stories, go check out the details for the story writing contest. There are prompts based off the past Creepy Cooking Staff episodes. The details are at creativehorror.com. And then we also have a costume contest that I am a little more excited for because I love costumes. And that is also open to everyone. Ourselves will also be competing. So essentially there's 2 parts to the costume contest. Any listeners who submit a photo of their costume are competing against other listeners, and then the creative horror staff that are entering are competing amongst the staff. And so that'll be fun. Alan and I are team Best Fiends, and our costumes are coming along great, and we're ready to take down you guys, which I think it's just you guys and then Ravel and Henry who are competing.
Yeah. We'll see about that.
We'll see who wins in the end.
And then we do have a live stream on October 30th.
Yeah, I believe that's decided on date.
Yes.
More details to come.
That should also be the release date of this year's annual Midnight Marinara revival.
Woo!
So keep an ear open for that one.
Lots of good stuff for Halloween. We're going to make the most out of this month. That is going by too fast.
Yes, it is. Also, David has brought back the Fog Report too. So, if you enjoy reading about haunts, go
the few haunts that actually exist in this current year.
These COVID safe haunts.
These haunt alternatives, yes. And in some cases, unique, different immersive experiences as a result of the challenges posed by.
You guys should do a fog report on the Taste of Halloween.
Taste of Halloween.
That is actually the next one that you're probably going to see. Honestly.
Do it.
I fully intend to write about it.
I would love to see that.
And there will be pictures, I will assure you.
Oh yeah. You can't stop me from taking pictures at this thing.
Mm-hmm. Until then,
okay, let's blow out the candles.
Happy Halloween, and again, what the fuck?
The candles are all we have lit in the fireplace, though. Just remember, we're safe inside.
What the fuck?
Good evening, intrepid listeners. This is the Pasta Shade, the host of Midnight Marinara, and this podcast is part of CreativeHorror.com, a network of podcasts and creators working together to build a constructive community of horror fans. For more content like this, visit us at CreativeHorror.com.